Hello and welcome to my kind of, sort of, not quite Let's Play channel. I created this channel in order to dump raw, unedited gameplay footage with no commentary, mostly as an archive of gameplay footage in case I decide to use it later. But I'm going to try something a little bit different. I've been very busy and stressed these past few months by a project at my real job, and so I haven't been keeping up with my production schedule for my regular video essay and critique channel. I have several projects in the works, but they are all going very slowly, including a very large project about Star Trek video games, in which this particular game is heavily featured. So I wanted to put something together quick and decided to try doing a non-scripted playthrough commentary with minimal editing. I'm at least doing the Federation and Klingon campaigns and might do the other two campaigns as well. We'll see how this goes. In any case, my plan is for the first part of the Federation and Klingon playthroughs to be free on this channel, and then any subsequent installments, with or without commentary, in these particular playthroughs will be Patreon exclusive content. I'm going to be talking about my general thoughts about Star Trek Infinite, walk you through some of what I'm doing in these playthroughs, and maybe go over a little bit of strategy for each individual campaign. If this all goes well, I might do more content like this in the future. So if you enjoy this, please like, subscribe, and comment, and all that good algorithm stuff. And also check out my main video essay channel, which is just called Mega Bears Fan, and also my blog at megabearsfan.net, and maybe also consider supporting my content creation on Patreon. There will be a link to my Patreon entry survey in the video description, so if you do become a patron, you can tell me that this specific video was what inspired you to contribute, and that will tell me that I should probably do more stuff like this. Thanks in advance to anyone who does contribute, as you are helping to offset the costs to maintain my personal blog website, as well as pay for the licenses for the software that I use to put together all of my fully edited video essays on the other channel, and also some of the stuff I use for this channel too. And thanks, of course, to all my current patrons and all my former patrons. Your support has really meant a lot. I lost a lot of my Patreon support during the pandemic due to financial hardships, and I've been trying to get some of it back, but it's been slow going. So I really appreciate anybody who decides to chip in $1 or $2 a month, or even heck, just $1 or $2 for 1 month. Whatever you can do, it's appreciated. Thanks again. So, Star Trek Infinite. I was really excited about Star Trek Infinite when it was first announced. My personal absolute favorite Star Trek game ever, and in fact, one of my favorite video games of all time, is an old Windows 98 CD-ROM game called Birth of the Federation. It was a 4X grand strategy Star Trek game developed by Microprose. Basically, they just made a reskin of Master of Orion 2 and slapped Star Trek on it. I've been itching for a sequel or spiritual successor to Birth of the Federation for like 25 years now, and I was really hoping and optimistic that Star Trek Infinite would be it. Further, there was a popular mod for Stellaris called New Horizons, which was a Star Trek Total Conversion mod for that game. It was pretty awesome. It had dozens of playable factions, went through the entire history of Star Trek, and even had scripted events and storylines that mirrored some of the events of the shows and movies. When Infinite was announced, I thought, incorrectly, that it was basically just going to be an official release of that mod. Like, I actually thought that Paradox had just hired the creators of the New Horizons mod in order to polish and flesh out that mod a little bit more, and then release it as a full retail game. Unfortunately, that was not the case, and one of my biggest complaints that I have with Infinite is its limited scope, especially compared to that mod. Infinite takes place entirely in the Next Generation era and only has 4 playable factions, the Federation, Klingons, Romulans, and Cardassians that you see here. Heck, even Birth of the Federation has 5 playable factions. So, needless to say, Infinite did not end up being the Birth of the Federation successor that I had been waiting a quarter century for. Worse yet, the game launched with a lot of bugs, wasn't reviewed particularly well, and didn't sell particularly well. So Paradox shuttered the development studio and canceled all further update and DLC plans, whatever those might have been. And this is one of those games that really needs DLC or expansions. So it's just a really damn shame that it's abandoned already, because I can totally see potential in this game, and that's some of what I'm going to be talking about in this upcoming video. Enjoy! Here's the first part of a Federation campaign in Star Trek Infinite.
Keep AI advice on. Tips are enabled.
So as I mentioned, the scope and scale of this game is actually fairly limited, which is, ironic considering that it's called Infinite. Each of the 4 campaigns begins shortly after the Khitomer Massacre, which fans of the Star Trek television series will probably recognize as the Romulan sneak attack against a Klingon outpost that killed Worf's parents, and for which Worf's parents were framed for collaborating with the Romulan attackers. So, right off the bat, this game is starting, pretty much in or just before the Next Generation era. So, there's no original series content in this game, there's no Enterprise content, there's no, movie Lost Era content in this game, so you're not ever going to get to build the Constitution-class USS Enterprise. You're not ever going to be able to build a refit Enterprise or any of those ships. In fact, even certain ship types from this era that you would expect to show up don't show up. I haven't seen an Ambassador class like the Enterprise C. I haven't seen Constellation classes like Picard Stargazer. And I also don't think they have ships like the Nebula class. Or others. For the Federation, you get Miranda-class destroyers. Then later you can get Excelsior-class starships, Galaxy-class, Intrepid-class, and maybe Defiant-class, and maybe 1 or 2 others, and the Oberth-class science ship, of course. So, content-wise, it's a little skimpy, little sparse. The first thing I'm doing here is basically just going through all of my planets and star systems and fleets and stuff like that, and just figuring out where everything is, what everything is, and what I want to do with it. Pretty soon here I'll be setting up some of my initial government edicts and stuff like that. So this being a game built on Stellaris, a lot of what you would do in Stellaris you also do here. So one of the very first orders of business is to go through and start collecting resources. So, I'm clicking on my construction ship. I'm going to build some mining stations to collect some energy and minerals.
Forces under the umbrella of Starfleet Command. All Starfleet ships double as research or combat vessels as needed, and can be ready for action at a moment's notice. An admiral should ideally be assigned to command each individual fleet.
And as you can see here, the game does have different species in it, so your particular empire can have multiple factions living within it. For example, the Federation is made up of humans, Vulcans, Andorians, and Tellarites, which of course are all the founding members of the Federation. But of course, since this game does not have any Enterprise content, it's interesting to note that it does feature Denobula in the Federation, but it does not feature the Denobulan species, which of course was the species of Dr. Phlox in the Enterprise prequel series. And something that you may notice watching this is that my mouse cursor seems to be in weird places. Sometimes it'll disappear, but a lot of times it's not highlighting over the thing that is actually supposed to be over where the tooltips are. And the reason for that is weird. So I'm playing this game on a fairly new gaming laptop that I bought last fall, specifically so that I could play City Skylines 2, because my previous gaming PC did not support ray tracing, which I think is a hardware requirement of City Skylines 2 in order to do volumetric clouds and water effects and stuff like that. So I had to buy a new laptop, and this laptop has a non-standard aspect ratio and resolution for the screen. This monitor I think its native resolution is like 2560 by 1600, which is not the normal, 19 by 11 aspect ratio of standard HD. So the game plays fine like that, but Infinite, for some reason, doesn't have settings to like change the resolution, or at least they were locked for me. I don't know what was going on there, so I tried to change the resolution, but it was locked as to whatever the native screen resolution was, and it wouldn't let me change it. So maybe that's some weird fluke configuration of my hardware. Maybe other people, you can change the resolution of the game. I don't know. I couldn't get it to change, so I had to play it at 2560 by 1600. But the recording software that I'm using, which is just the basic Windows Xbox game capture that's built into Windows, you hit the command button and press G to bring up the overlay and then record. It's recording at like the regular definition, regular resolution, but the mouse cursor position was in the actual native resolution of the laptop. So after I was done playing the game, I noticed that when I went back to the footage, the actual gameplay was like just a small box in the corner of the screen, and there was a bunch of black. And I actually had to throw it into some video editing tool, Premiere, and stretch it out to fill the entire screen. And I had to change its aspect ratio a little bit. But because of that, the mouse position does not line up with the actual gameplay footage that you see. So you can see I'm like clicking on things, but the mouse is like way off to the side, and a lot of times it just goes off the screen. That's because it's the mouse cursor's in a different resolution than the actual gameplay. So again, I don't know why that happens. I don't know if that's just some fluke configuration of my system, but whatever. I hope it's not too bothersome. I could not figure out a way to fix it. I tried, so hopefully it's not too much of a problem. You can usually see what I'm actually highlighting over, because this game has like tooltips and pop-ups for like everything. So you just saw that I zoomed out to the galactic map, and you can see that, because this game kind of starts in an in medias res kind of situation, we have our four empires, the Federation, the Klingons, Romulans, and Cardassians, all already have pre-existing empires and established borders, and like their borders press right up against each other, save for the Federation not currently sharing a border with the Romulans, because there's that little neutral zone in between, which is like weird, because it's like a block of four planets instead of like a line along the border, which you would kind of expect it to be. I don't know exactly what Noble Giant's thought process was behind creating the neutral zone the way they did, instead of stretching it out into a straight line, but this is how they did things. So this is a starting configuration that I think has some pros and some cons. I have very mixed feelings about it. I'll start with the cons. So the cons is, one of my favorite things about 4X strategy games is I love the early exploration and discovery phase. I like starting out real small and then, finding, places to build new settlements or colonies or whatever, and just learning the lay of the land. And one of the other things that you can see that starts is the Federation already has established relationships with the Betazoid Houses. That's going to be the same for every map, as far as I can tell, whereas the position of other minor races will be semi-randomized. So, like, for instance, the very first time I played the game, I had the Betazoid Houses, and then a little bit more to the galactic southwest of those, I found the Trill homeworld. And I really liked that starting configuration, but I ended up abandoning that particular game because I didn't really understand the influence mechanic yet, and I was playing very suboptimally. So I quit, and I started another game. And now, because of that, different minor factions are in the place where the Trill were, and sometimes they're hostile. And I think in one game, maybe it was this one, like I ended up finding like Nausicaan pirates there instead, which kind of sucked. So I really wish that I could have used the same map as that original playthrough attempt for this particular playthrough. but I also could not find a way to like recover that map's random seed and reuse it to seed this map. So I was stuck with whatever the game gave me. So we'll see who's down there later on. So anyway, as I was saying, the pros and cons of this in medias res start. You don't get as much of that early game exploration stuff as you might get from like regular Stellaris, where you start with like one homeworld and you explore from there, or like what you might get from a game like Civilization. In addition, and here's the by the way, the pop-up for the Kittimer massacre. So as you can see, this is right at the start of the game. So you don't get a completely new, clean map to explore. There's going to be a lot of things that are going to be the same. A lot of things outside of your core empire are all pseudo-randomized, stuff like that. But you kind of have an idea of where everything is every time you play the game. And Paradox games just have this kind of frustrating habit of bombarding the player with information right at the start of the game. You get prompts for diplomatic events that you have no idea what they are. There's tutorial pop-ups and tooltips, like everything you click on. There's events that are starting or expiring. You might have, like, in some of these games, you might even start in the middle of a war with, like, troops moving around and stuff like that. It's really complicated. It can be very frustrating. And it makes it very hard to start a Paradox game. I'm pretty sure that probably every player who plays these games probably has to restart the campaign multiple times, do a lot of save scumming just to figure out what the heck is going on. I certainly had to do a lot of that in my playthroughs. So, there's some definite disadvantages to this particular configuration that the developers went with. But it does have a few advantages as well. And one of those advantages is that the in medias res start means that there's opportunities for very early game conflict. My borders right here are already pressed right up against Klingon borders, already pressed right up against Cardassian borders. The Cardassians are currently occupying Bajor, so maybe that's something that I want to do something about. Maybe it isn't. Maybe I just let it be. Maybe I try to liberate them. We have this existing neutral zone with the Romulans that I can't enter. The Romulans can't enter, although they can just go around because there's all those empty systems right there by Wolf 359 and places like that.
To understand you.
So there's opportunities at the beginning of the game to do like diplomacy and stuff like that. So, that's a little bit cool that you just kind of get right into the game. But I still prefer like games like Civilization. I like how Civ, you start out with just one little warrior in one city, and then you in a tiny little corner of the map, and then you explore out, you find new things, you build more units, you build more cities. New mechanics are introduced to you over, the course of like the first 50 turns or so. It's not just like an information overload where, like I said before, everything you click on has to have a new tutorial tooltip because you have no idea what any of these things do. And that's just always been something that's made it very, very difficult for me to get into Paradox games. I was very excited when Crusader Kings 3 came out, because I had tried to play Crusader Kings 2 multiple times, and just along with like Europa Universalis, and I just I didn't get it. It was like way over my head. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get into Crusader Kings 3 at the ground level when the game releases, so that I hopefully understand how the heck to play the game. There's other weird, kind of annoying design decisions that Paradox puts into games and into this one. Like, for instance, you might notice that I have a military fleet flying around the southern perimeter of my borders, kind of exploring different systems. But Stellaris and also Star Trek Infinite have this very hard delineation between military ships and science ships. And only science ships can actually survey systems. So currently my science ship is up at Wolf 359, surveying Wolf 359, and I did that because from previous playthroughs I know that Wolf 359 is going to have an M-class habitable planet, so I want to survey it and then build an outpost there and colonize it ASAP before the Romulans or Klingons get to it, because you have to survey a system before you can send a construction ship to build an outpost and claim it. So, like, what the heck do you do with your military ships in the meantime? Like, when you're not at war, there's just not a whole lot to do with them. Like, I can send them out to explore, but one of the limitations of that is that they can't survey, they can't find any anomalies there, and once they leave the system, you can't go back into that system and see what was there. Like, all the planets become, like, grayed out, and you can't click on them and see what class they are or anything. Like, you can just see their vague outline and, like, maybe get an idea of how big they are. So unless you actually, like, go in and look at every single star system that your military fleet is exploring, you're just not getting any useful information, at least none that's retained. And I think that's a really silly design decision, because especially in the context of Star Trek, you know, like, one of the things that you see in Star Trek is in any given episode is the Enterprise is out exploring. Like, the Enterprise explores new systems, it surveys them, it creates star charts, it makes first contact, it researches anomalies. Like, that's the whole mission of the Enterprise, you know, to seek out strange new life and new civilizations. But in this game, like, the Enterprise can't do that, right? Only these Oberth-class science ships can. And it's just a really weird. Like, I get that maybe this, you know, the science ships should be specialized, like they should have a special function. But for the Federation especially, I feel like just your regular military ships should be able to do that stuff too, or at least the large starships. Okay, maybe these little maybe these little Miranda-class ships can't, even though we see the Reliant specifically doing that in the Wrath of Khan. But, I mean, you can make an argument that maybe these smaller ships don't have the facilities for this sort of thing, but the bigger starships definitely do. Like, that's their entire purpose, right? Starfleet is, yes, it is a military organization, but it is also a science and exploration organization. You know, the primary mission of Starfleet is defense, and then it is exploration. And that's something that just unfortunately is not reflected in this particular game, and that was something that disappointed me. Even though I do like the fact that, in contrast to Birth of the Federation specifically, like, I like that Stellaris and Star Trek Infinite do let you explore systems, and you do have to survey them, and there is a chance of discovering, like, anomalies and phenomenon and stuff there. So there are things to do out on the map. Whereas in Birth of the Federation, you know, there would be, like, phenomenon and stuff like that. There would be pulsars and wormholes and stuff. But they were basically just obstacles for fleets or modifiers for, like, combat. You didn't send your ships out to, like, do science in a nebula, right, and get, like, research points from it. Whereas in this game, you do. And that's a really cool feature. That's very thematic for Star Trek. I just don't know why my regular starships can't do that. You also get these little, like, events and, like, little mini-quest sort of things that you can do in the game, which almost always give you, like, some kind of decision to make. Usually, it's you get one resource or another. The game tells you exactly what you're going to get from every decision that you make, in most cases. Sometimes there's, like, a probability kind of thing of getting one outcome or another, but in most cases, the game tells you exactly what you're going to get. So, you know, you're not ever making decisions that are based in, like, morality or ethics. They're mostly just utilitarian, like, what yields do I get? What value does this decision have for me? Which is also a little bit unfortunate.
Construction finished on schedule.
So now you can see that in the time that it took for my military fleet to literally explore every single star system that borders the Federation, my science vessel finally finished surveying Wolf 359, which means now I can actually send a construction ship over to Wolf 359, and I can build an outpost which claims the territory for me, which will allow me to start collecting resources and yields, and also to colonize that M-class planet that's there.
Discovery logged. A new tradition.
And now I just unlocked a tradition. This is one of the ways that Star Trek Infinite has for specializing the different factions. Each faction has this tradition tree. They all share these same 6 on the right, where you can choose from either defense or conquest. And then on the left, there's like a faction-specific tradition tree. So that's one of the things that helps to specialize each faction, give them a little bit different play style, but also still let the player, shape that faction's play style based on how you want to play. And so, kind of going back to that topic of science ships again, you notice that in order for a science ship to be able to do anything, you also have to have a scientist leader, which is fine. Again, I don't see why they couldn't have just made it so that military ships could also research phenomena and stuff like that, but then maybe give like the science ships better outcomes if they have a science officer on board, so that, again, you would have something that you can do with your military ships when you're not in like an open state of war. Because this game doesn't even have like border skirmishes or anything like that. If you are not in an open state of war, you cannot fight or attack other players. There's like pirates and stuff like that, NPC factions that you can fight and attack, but they're few and far between. So for the most part, if you're not at war, your fleets are just kind of like sitting around doing nothing. They don't do border patrols, again, because you don't have to worry about enemy ships just crossing your borders and doing little border skirmish sorts of things. Your military ships don't have like particularly high sensor range, so they don't let you like see enemy ship movements on the other side of the border. There's just not a whole lot for them to do. And I feel like that's another just huge oversight, because in Star Trek, like, these ships are doing stuff all the time, and it isn't just the Enterprise. But you see, the Enterprise and also other ships, they're like, in addition to exploring, planets and, scanning phenomenon and stuff like that, they're like ferrying dignitaries around, they're like escorting colony ships, they're actually contributing to terraforming of planets. They're doing all sorts of, scientific and diplomatic and sometimes even like economic activities. Like they'll, escort cargo ships full of like medicine and stuff like that, and they'll go and they'll provide aid, to some planet if there's like an outbreak of disease or something like that. And every now and then, like, there's an event that pops up that asks you to send a military ship over to it. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen from time to time. So, like, okay, that's something, but it just would have been really nice if there was just more for these ships and fleets to do. Anyway, this being a Paradox real-time strategy game, there's a lot of downtime, a lot of just waiting for things to happen, so I'm not going to make you sit through all of that. I will fast forward through things that don't have a whole lot going on. So now I just unlocked a spy, And since military and science ships cannot enter the Romulan neutral zone, I'm going to go ahead and use this spy to explore the systems in the Romulan neutral zone, at least figure out what the heck is there, and then probably send them to explore other systems in enemy territory before starting to do some actual spy missions. Well, this chromatic vortex event is probably as good an opportunity as any to start talking about influence and the different ways that the different factions in this game expand. So influence is the primary resource that you use to expand your empire. It's used for building outposts to claim new systems. It's used for many diplomatic actions. It's used for making claims on enemy systems, and you have to make a claim on an enemy system in order to actually take control of that system when you win a war. If you just go to war without any claims, you don't actually take any systems, even if you occupied that system during the war. So the Federation is actually at a pretty significant disadvantage when it comes to influence in this game. They don't generate a whole lot of it, and they don't really have very many, if any, ways to generate more of it. The other factions have like buildings and stuff that they can build in their planets that generate influence. The Federation doesn't. It pretty much only comes from like leaders and a couple other sources. So this severely limits how quickly the Federation can build new outposts and claim new systems, and it's a huge throttle on the Federation's ability to expand militarily through conquest, because you don't have enough influence to create a lot of claims in order to conquer enemy systems. So instead, what the Federation is supposed to do is they are supposed to use diplomacy, which of course also costs influence. Different diplomatic treaties cost influence, trade agreements might cost influence, and integration processes cost influence. So the Federation is expected to make friends with rival factions. Or not with rival factions. The Federation is expected to make friends with minor factions and, trade with them and build positive relationships, and then eventually integrate them into the Federation as members, as opposed to claiming new systems through military conquest or by building outposts. And this is one of the other primary ways the different factions are differentiated from each other, in addition to their tradition trees, one of those just popped up, and also their mission trees, which you may have seen earlier and which will probably come up again in this episode and also in the next episode. So right now I'm working on the integration process of the Betazoid Houses. And it costs tiny amounts of influence in order to conduct the diplomatic agreements with these minor factions to become friendly with them. And then eventually they join, and then you get back all of that influence generation that you were spending passively on those diplomatic agreements, which you can then spend towards the next. And now here, interestingly enough, we have a related thing, which is the First Contact little mini game. So when you meet a new civilization that you haven't met before, this little First Contact dialogue pops up, and you have the opportunity to assign an envoy in order to try to learn that alien faction's language and then establish formal diplomatic contact. This is a feature that I like in principle. I don't really like that it's as passive as it is and doesn't really have any interesting decisions to make. Like, the envoys aren't characters or leaders like the scientists and governors and admirals and stuff are. So they don't have skills or traits. They don't gain experience. They're not specialized in any way. So it doesn't matter which envoy you send to a particular minor race in order to either make first contact with them or to improve relationships with a minor faction or with a major faction for that matter. As long as you have an envoy to send, it makes no difference who you send. You just send whatever is available. So they're less like characters or leaders and more of just like a currency that you spend. just another bucket full of yields. And I think that's a shame. It would have been really nice if these envoys did have like traits or something. Like maybe some of them would be better at first contact, while others might be better at improving relations with major factions, and yet others might be better at improving relations with minor factions. So, if I have 3 envoys and I meet 3 different minor factions that I want to make first contact with, it would matter which one I send where. Or maybe they might have traits that even modify like the starting diplomatic modifier when they do make successful first contact. So maybe you have like some really, really friendly, really formal diplomats, like Ambassador Sarek or someone like that, who's like really, really good. They're fast at establishing first contact, and then like you get like a massive bonus towards your initial diplomatic modifier after first contact is completed. And then you might have like a Tellarite who, might be fast at doing it, but might, because the Tellarites have this reputation for being kind of adversarial, like maybe you don't get as many diplomatic points. Or maybe it's even the opposite. Maybe you say that because they're adversarial, it takes longer, but then once they develop that understanding and rapport, then there is a stronger relationship to build off of. Or maybe you send the Tellarites, to like the Klingons, and maybe they get along really well with the Klingons because they like to throw insults at each other back and forth. But none of that's in the game. Every envoy is exactly the same as every other envoy, regardless of what species they are or where you send them. And that's a real shame. But this is also kind of one of the areas where the limited scope and the lack of future DLC and expansions is really going to hurt this game. It does hurt this game now, and is also going to hurt this game long term, for whatever the heck that's worth, considering the game's basically already dead and probably isn't going to sell very much more. But it's really cool that these factions do have these different playstyles. And in fact, that's actually an upgrade over Birth of the Federation, which only had like minimal token differences between the different factions. They had slightly different unique buildings, slightly different ships, and a few specializations. Like the Klingons would have their morale go up whenever they would go to war and whenever they would win battles, whereas the Federation would lose morale if there was a declaration of war. And they would also lose morale if you invade other alien systems worlds, whereas the Klingons are like, yeah, conquer that world, and then, let's have a big feast and party to celebrate it. But other than like little stuff like that, there wasn't much specialization between the different factions in Birth of the Federation. There's a little bit more in this game. In addition to the different ship types, the different traditions, different missions, the Federation gets access to more envoys than the other factions do. So they are able to build and maintain and improve more diplomatic relations with more factions and integrate minor factions a lot faster than the other factions can, just because they have more of this currency to spend. The other factions have more influence, the Federation has more envoys. But really, the Federation is the only faction in Star Trek Infinite that actually does play considerably differently than the other factions, because when it all comes down to it, the other 3 factions are all just different flavors of militaristic. The Cardassians and Romulans also have some covert actions and espionage built into their aggressive playstyle, and maybe you can argue that the Romulans are meant to be a little more turtley and a little less like outright aggressive. But like they're all built around war and conquest as their primary methods of expansion. And so it really would have been nice to have more factions in this game so that there could be a wider variety of playstyles. And in particular, it would have been nice if they just completed the Birth of the Federation faction roster and included the Ferengi as a playable major faction. And then the Ferengi could have been themed more around like mercantile play and trade and maybe also piracy. So you can play peaceful by establishing treaties and conducting trade and, maybe bribing other factions or minor factions to, to ally with you or join you or whatever. Or like maybe you're sending out your marauders and stuff like that to actually like raid enemy shipping and trade and doing piracy and like stealing money from them and resources and using that to build your empire. And that would have offered like a third way of playing the game at the very least, as opposed to the peaceful diplomatic federation versus the other three factions that are just slightly different variations of aggressive conquistadors basically. But yes, as you can see, this first contact process is very slow, very passive. I keep coming back and checking on its progress. I'm currently in the second stage, which is that, we've kind of established communication, but now we're trying to like learn the language and figure out each other's culture and customs. And like there's different like difficulty modifiers for different minor factions, and there's like this random chance of having a breakthrough that advances you to the next stage, but like it's all just random like simulated stuff in the background. Like none of this is things that the player can control or really even influence, because like I said, all the envoys are, as far as I can tell, are functionally identical. None of them are any better or worse at this than any of the others. It's cool that they made first contact an emphasis. They have this mechanic about it. Again, that's thematic. It works very well in the context of the Star Trek IP. It's just unfortunate that it doesn't do a whole lot. And here I think we finally finished the first contact. So we met the Hyperion autocracy, and now we finally have a choice, right? We have these three different ways that we can greet them. We can spend a bunch of money to like have a feast and celebrate, or we can have like this middle ground thing where we just kind of say, okay, well, we'll have some more diplomatic relations in the future. That doesn't really cost all that much. And then there's the red one, which is like almost like insulting them or threatening them, which is a negative diplomatic modifier, but I think it's like a free action. You don't have to pay any resources to do that. So it's kind of like the default, right, is to be kind of belligerent and hostile. But of course, I'm the Federation right now. I have plenty of resources, so I'm going to hold a big feast and a party, and we're going to celebrate first contact and get that positive diplomatic modifier, which I really want, because this, again, is the primary way that the Federation actually expands in this game. Another interesting little thing about this game is that the developers took the opportunity to also kind of create their own little storylines and reshape some of the Star Trek history and lore. Some of it, I'm kind of iffy on, but there are some things which I actually really like. And here we have the Aftermath event chain, which is basically this game's introduction to the Borg. One of my science ships encountered a Borg cube and was, attacked and forced to retreat. And now we've got this quest line to go back to the site of the battle and figure out what the heck happened. So obviously this is different than how the introduction to the Borg happened in the TV show, because Q isn't popping in and flinging any of my ships or the Enterprise, halfway across the galaxy in order to meet the Borg. But one of the things that I actually really like about this game, and its own unique contributions to Star Trek lore, is something that we haven't really seen yet in this particular playthrough, but there's this concept of hyperspace or subspace highways, which basically go through like black holes. Different black holes in the game are linked with these subspace warp highways that ships can travel through at like ridiculously fast speeds. And the game says that they are left behind by some technologically advanced alien civilization that isn't around anymore, is possibly extinct. And encountering these warp highways seems to be the way that you trigger the Borg quest line. So I kind of wonder if the implication here is that these warp highways are actually derelict Borg transwarp conduits that other ships from other races are, stumbling across and then using. Which is an interesting concept, because, we find out in Star Trek Voyager that, yes, the Borg have transwarp conduits going all around the galaxy that they use to travel from place to place extremely quickly. But, we never see those earlier in Star Trek history. It's like a big retcon kind of thing. Well, in this game kind of tries to explain that, well, maybe these have been being used all along, and we just didn't know it. So we have one of the things that annoys me about Star Trek is how the writers either don't care about or can't agree on how fast warp travel is. So in any given episode or movie of Star Trek or TV series, warp speed is however the heck fast the writers need it to be. Even though we have technical manuals and in-canon on-screen explanations of how fast warp speeds are and how long it should take to get places, when the writers of, say, Star Trek V decide they want the Enterprise to go to the center of the galaxy, it just gets to warp to the center of the galaxy, and that takes place over, maybe it's a few hours, maybe it's a few days. The movie isn't entirely clear in that regard. I don't know how long Kirk and Spock and McCoy are in the brig before Scotty breaks them out. I don't know how long they're just kind of chilling with Sybok, waiting to get to the center of the galaxy. But in that movie, the Enterprise A goes from Earth to... oh my god, I'm blanking on the name of the planet. It's not Narendra, right? The planet of intergalactic peace. Oh god, I'm going to kick myself for not remembering the name of this planet. But it's at the intersection between the Klingon, Romulan, and Federation borders. In fact, I think it's in the game in here somewhere.
We have surveyed.
I just don't remember I'm blanking on the name of it. Was it Narendra 3? I don't think it was. But anyway, so here's a highway node. So the Enterprise goes to the Klingon-Romulan neutral zone, right, which is at the edge of Federation space, and then to the center of the galaxy, right, which is half the distance that Voyager would have had to travel to get back home. But the Enterprise A does this in a matter of all of this in the matter of maybe 2 days, maybe a few more, right, depending on how much time passes between scenes that we just don't see. And then you've got other things like the Enterprise NX-01, and Enterprise goes from Earth to Kronos in I think a few days, and that's a trip that, especially at the lower warp speeds of the NX-01 Enterprise, should have taken weeks or months. But they get there in a few days. And what this warp highway thing does in Star Trek Infinite is it provides a retcon explanation for how that might have been possible, right? Maybe the Enterprise A and the Enterprise NX-01 and the original series Enterprise going out to the edge of the galaxy and then flying out towards Andromeda, maybe they were using these warp highways, right? And the characters didn't mention it, right? Because it's just something that they're always doing. They're always using these highways. Federation ships are doing it, Klingon ships are doing it, Romulan ships are doing it. They're just there, and they just use them. And maybe they've been using them all along, and all along they've been abandoned Borg transwarp conduits. And we just never knew. So, as one of those, nitpicky, lore-obsessed Star Trek fans, I think it's cool that Paradox and Noble Giant Games came up with their own explanation for that inconsistency in warp speeds between the different shows and movies, and gave like an actually kind of satisfying answer for like how and why that could work, and still be like narratively consistent. Obviously, the placement of these warp highways in this game isn't exactly where they would probably have had to have been in order for them to be used in the ways that I was saying they would be used. You'd probably have to have a warp highway that's much closer to Earth in order for NX-01 or the original Enterprise to have benefited from it. But even it being over there by like Wolf 359, which is where a warp highway usually appears on almost every map that I've ever played, except maybe for this one. Was there a warp highway there?
We will do our best to understand you.
No. Like, this might be the only map that I've played in this game so far that doesn't have a warp highway near Wolf 359. So anyway, in the game, there is this entire little quest line, and every faction gets to do it, even though canonically the initial Borg incursions happen in Romulan and Federation space. But every faction gets this same quest line around the same time in the game. I think it's always when you discover that first warp highway or second warp highway. You get that aftermath mission, and then you go back, you can explore the battle site, and meet the Borg pretty early in the game. Like, I was actually really surprised that it happens as early as it does. I would have thought that the Borg would be more of like an endgame thing, but it's like a game-long thing. This is something that unfolds over the course of the entire campaign. Like, I'm not going to have like the Battle of Wolf 359 happening in this episode or the next episode or probably even the episode after that.
Warp highways are the fast-track lanes of the galaxy, allowing even our most warp-capable vessels to traverse unimaginable distances in a relatively short time. Travel along warp highways bypasses all diplomatic borders, but requires using specific entry and exit points. Think of them as a sort of navigational shortcut. No one knows whether the warp highways in our galaxy occurred naturally or were put there, but their well-worn subspace composition tells us we were likely not the first to use them.
So here you can see that implication that these warp highways were being used by some highly advanced spacefaring civilization previously. And it happens to be where you encounter the Borg. So maybe the Borg assimilated that culture and that's why they're not around anymore, or maybe they are Borg transwarp conduits. Personally, I kind of like the idea of them just being Borg transwarp conduits, although I guess I'm fine with either way. But once we get through this mission stuff, so I've already completed one mission. So this is another way that the game specializes the different factions. You pick different missions, and it kind of progresses its own little storyline as well. And now here you can kind of see the path that the highway nodes take. So like this particular highway node basically allows me to bypass all of Klingon space and go way out into the Beta Quadrant. Or it lets me go to the Galactic West over by where the somewhere between the Cardassian and the Betazoid factions. And I don't think the game lets any factions claim highway nodes. So they're always considered neutral territory. Of course, you could completely surround a highway node and lock another player out from using them, but you can always travel through the highway nodes if you can get access to the node. And since no faction can ever claim any particular node, as long as you have access to any point on the chain, you can get to anywhere else on the chain. But of course, starships, military ships, all have a limited warp range, which basically only extends like 1.5 star systems out from the edge of your borders.
We will do our best.
And if you do send a military ship through a warp highway to well outside of that ship's warp range, like it's basically stuck. It can't go anywhere except for back the other way through the highway, the warp highway. So you're not going to be able to use these to like send a massive fleet out to like an opponent's back door and invade them from the other side. But you can send out your science ships because your science ships don't have that same warp range. So this is also one of the ways, because the beginning of the game, especially for the Federation, like you're basically surrounded, at least on 3 sides, by enemy factions whose borders you can't cross. So these warp highways, from a gameplay standpoint, are also kind of clever design because they give the Federation in particular a way to actually explore the rest of the galaxy that's available in the game, at least the alpha and beta quadrants that are in the game, without being completely hemmed in by the other factions. And, you know, even for the other factions, like for the Klingons or the Cardassians who start on the far end, these warp highways allow, for example, the Klingons to travel to the galactic west, past the Federation space, past Cardassian space, and explore the galactic western fringes of the Alpha Quadrant, and then inversely for the Cardassians, they can bypass Federation or Romulan space, bypass Klingon space, and explore the other side of the Beta Quadrant. Yeah, like this is one way of explaining how Federation starships are just like all over the place all the time. You know, one of the reasons that the Federation is able to be so expansive might be because they have a bunch of these, you know, humans, you know, in Federation, we're just lucky that they're kind of at the hub, you know, one of the hubs of these highways, and can just go out in all different directions. And that would explain how they're able to explore, like, way out beyond Klingon space, way out beyond Romulan space, way out beyond Cardassian space, and all the way to the edge of the galaxy and all the way to the center of the galaxy. You know, and then maybe the warp highways that connect, like, the Delta Quadrant to the Beta Quadrant, like, maybe there isn't a direct connection from the Alpha Quadrant to the Beta Quadrant to the Delta Quadrant, which is why the Federation was never able to get to the Delta Quadrant, and why Voyager couldn't just use these highways to get back. And maybe the Borg also didn't have these warp highways in the part of the Delta Quadrant where Voyager gets stranded, because, like, they don't care about assimilating the Kazon. You know, maybe those highways just didn't exist. Or maybe it's something where, like, it's hard to locate these things on sensors, and, you know, the reason they're used within the Federation is because, you know, they've been stumbled upon and everyone knows where they are. But, you know, maybe it's really hard to find them if you're just looking for them in uncharted parts of space where they've never been used or aren't regularly used. They aren't charted. So, you know, we also have a built-in explanation for how this ridiculously fast method of traveling across the galaxy can exist, and also how Voyager can still get stranded. You know, and if the Borg or whoever built these transwarp conduits, if they never had access to the Gamma Quadrant, well, that's also why we haven't had earlier contact with the Dominion or other Gamma Quadrant races, because these highways don't connect to the Gamma Quadrant. It's just the maybe Delta Quadrant to the Beta Quadrant, and then other nodes within the Alpha Quadrant or that connect the Alpha Quadrant to the Beta Quadrant, but which don't connect the Alpha Quadrant to the Delta Quadrant.
We have surveyed a new star system.
And so here, yeah, you can see my science ship traveling along the highway nodes. I get to the other end of Klingon space, and then the other end of Romulan space. And then it looks like that's kind of a dead end. So I can explore back to, you know, that border where the Klingon and Federation space is, that first highway node, and it looks like that's going to take me over to just a little bit west of Beta Z. And then I don't remember if it's a dead end after that, or if it keeps going, like, out past Cardassian space.
Finished on schedule.
And this is what's frustrating about this game having launched in the state that it did, and not getting proper support from Paradox, and getting killed prematurely. You know, I don't know why Paradox released the game in the state that it was released in. I've read a lot of people speculating that both this game and also City Skylines 2 were kind of rushed out the door by Paradox because Lamplighters League failed miserably, and they were trying to make back some of the money that they lost. I don't think that was the case with City Skylines 2, because the announcement of City Skylines 2 release date was like 6 or 8 months in advance of the game launching, so I think they were planning on that, even though the game didn't release in the best of states. I think that was its planned release date. This game, on the other hand, I don't know, like, maybe Paradox rushed this out the door because of the failure of Lamplighters League. And if so, it's a damn shame, because there are these really good ideas that are in this game. You know, there are good ideas gameplay-wise, and there's also good ideas thematically. You know, an example of ways that this game, you know, potentially improves on the Stellaris gameplay formula is with the return of the warp drive mechanic. So, for those of you who, you know, didn't play Stellaris, or for those of you who did but, you know, got on late, so when Stellaris first came out, different factions had different FTL methods. So some factions had a warp drive, some factions used like wormhole generators, and some factions used like space lanes. And the wormhole or the warp drive, you know, was basically like a Star Trek warp drive. The ship could go anywhere within its warp range. And this was removed from Stellaris at some point many years ago because of balance issues. So I don't know the full story because I wasn't super hardcore into Stellaris, but my understanding is that there were a lot of players who were complaining that the warp drive mechanic kind of broke warfare, because the other factions that did not use warp drives had pretty significant restrictions in where their ships and fleets could move to and how long it took them to get there. Whereas the warp drive was a little bit more free, and because of that, ships and fleets with warp drives could basically just warp past defensive infrastructure and blockades and defensive lines and hit an enemy in their like interior defenses. So people complained that defensive fleets and defensive buildings like star bases and fortifications and whatever were like useless or severely underpowered because warp drive could basically just warp right past it. And the defender didn't really have any way of like meaningfully responding to that. So for Star Trek Infinite, Nimble Giant, as far as I can tell, basically like went back to an older version of Stellaris that still had the warp drive in place. And I don't think they added it back to the newer versions of Stellaris, because I think the newer versions of Stellaris also have a lot of other features and ease of use and UI upgrades that Star Trek Infinite doesn't have. So I'm pretty sure, but I don't know for sure, because like I said, I haven't played Stellaris in years, but I'm pretty sure that Star Trek Infinite is built on an older version of Stellaris back when it still had warp drive. But from my recollection of Stellaris compared to Star Trek Infinite, I think that Nimble Giant made a few modifications to the way that warp drive works in order to kind of counterbalance the problems that Stellaris initially had with warp drive. One of the things that they changed is that military fleets have that very limited warp drive range. So basically, fleets can only warp to like 1 or 1.5 systems away from the outer perimeter of their own borders, which mitigates or completely eliminates the problems with warp drive fleets just flying past or warping over defensive fleets and defensive infrastructure, because you can pretty much only reach the star systems that are adjacent to your borders anyway. So now you can put defensive fleets and star bases and fortifications and stuff along your borders,
Starfleet
and
vessels
they're a
improved.
lot more defensive than they were in original Stellaris, especially if you only have, especially if there are bottlenecks, where you only have like a couple systems that are border systems. I mean, if you've got like a long line of like 5, 6, 10, 20 star systems along your border, then I mean, yeah, you can't realistically fortify all of those. But if you've got like 2, 3, like, yeah, you can actually fortify stuff now. It's a lot easier to do compared to back in the original Stellaris. So you don't really have that problem of warp-capable fleets being able to just warp past border defenses and straight to, like, the Defender's homeworld, or whatever, which you might have had in Stellaris. Another thing that Star Trek Infinite has, which I don't remember being in the older versions of Stellaris, but maybe it was. Again, it's been years since I played. I don't remember all the details. But the game will actually give you... Star Trek Infinite will actually give you little like dialogue prompt messages whenever an enemy fleet is en route to one of your star systems. So when you see one of those messages pop up, I don't think that's going to happen in this particular video because I don't think I'm ever at war with anyone, but you'll see it in the Klingon video that I'll be doing later. So when an enemy ship is warping to one of your systems, you'll get a little dialogue box that will pop up that will tell you that an enemy fleet is approaching so-and-so system, and you can just pause the game and look for all of your fleets and warp them over to defend. And as long as you have an outpost, and especially if you have a starbase with some defensive modifications added to it, you're probably going to hold off that enemy fleet long enough for reinforcements to arrive. So the warp drive in Star Trek Infinite does not feel as completely broken and unfair as it did in Stellaris. And that's great, because I really liked the warp drive mechanic in the original version of Stellaris. I didn't have a whole lot of wars when I was playing Stellaris, so I didn't run into a lot of the problems that the other players were reporting. So I really liked the warp drive mechanic, and I was really, really disappointed and sad that that Paradox removed the warp mechanic for Stellaris 2.0, or I think it was 2.0. And that was basically when I fell off of Stellaris. Like, I stopped playing Stellaris after that 2.0 patch was released that removed warp drive. I think I might have continued playing the New Horizons mod a little bit.
Construction in progress.
On a reverted older version of Stellaris that still had the warp drive, because New Horizons had not been updated for that patch yet, so it still was only compatible with the older versions. That was basically where I stopped playing Stellaris, was when warp drive disappeared. So I'm very happy to see it back, and I'm happy that Nimble Giant found some ways to mitigate the problems that players originally complained about. And, it's unfortunate that Paradox wasn't able to do the same with the original version of Stellaris. But, I mean, there were other reasons probably why Paradox couldn't do that, because different ships had different ranges. And if you severely limited the range of all of the ships, then, you have problems with technology and stuff like that. So, I mean, there's still problems with the way that warp drive works in Star Trek Infinite, especially where defensive wars are concerned. There's still frustrations, there's still hiccups. Personally,
construction in progress.
I wish that Paradox and Nimble Giant games had just found a way to, like, allow ships and fleets to intercept enemy fleets that are approaching or crossing your borders or crossing by systems. And I know that might not be, like, super easy to do in Stellaris' engine on a technical level, because Stellaris doesn't really have a concept or a mechanic for being in open space. Like, everything in the game happens at star systems.
Our ways are not likely to change.
So Paradox or Nimble Giant games would have to find a way to get around that. And Paradox, I guess, never found a solution for it, and Nimble Giant either didn't try or didn't figure it out, or maybe they had ideas and they just didn't have enough time or budget to implement them. I don't know. But I could totally imagine a mechanic where a ship or fleet could be stationed along a border system and then be given an intercept assignment that would allow it to intercept enemy fleets that are flying into the border or past that system. And then they would fly out of their system and then meet the enemy system out in open space, in between actual star systems. And then, you'd have a battle there, and if you click on that battle, then instead of just taking you to a screen where it shows like a solar system or star system, it could just take you to a battlefield that's just out in open space, in a black void with stars around.
Federation
and then you could watch the battle happen there, and then when the battle's over, like that's just not there anymore, right? So these little pockets of interstellar space would basically only exist when fleets meet each other and engage in battles. Now, I mean, it would be nice if you could build outposts and star bases out in interstellar space and not, in orbit of a star or a planet, because that is something that happens in Star Trek. But, I'm fine with the concession that
the spread
you can't do
tracks
that.
Our civilization's growth, including relevant data on all systems and colonies.
But I do wish that space battles could happen in interstellar space, because that's where most space battles that we see happen in Star Trek happen. We very rarely in Star Trek see space battles happen in orbit of a planet or in a star system. It's usually out in interstellar space. And it would be nice to see that be a possibility in Stellaris and in Star Trek Infinite. And I don't think it would be technically impossible. It just would require a little bit more engineering and a little bit of creativity on the part of the developer and publisher.
How may we say?
But I could totally see something like that working. And, then they also have the missions, little things after the battle. You can, send science ships back to, examine the debris and, reverse engineer some of the enemy technology that you find from the enemy fleet's debris. So you could still have that, right? You just create a node, in that location where that debris would be and where you can send a science ship to go and do that mission. And then just the node disappears when the mission is resolved and there's nothing else to do there. But I just don't know if this engine has the capability of dynamically adding and removing nodes in that fashion. And maybe that is the technical limitation that prevents Paradox and Stellaris and Nimble Giant in Star Trek Infinite from doing something like that. And maybe it's just not practical or not technically feasible to work around that. So, I don't know, maybe for Stellaris 2, they could have something like that. I imagine we're probably not going to see a Star Trek Infinite 2, unfortunately, since the game kind of flopped. Alright, so we're kind of getting towards the end of this particular gameplay session. What have we accomplished so far? Well, the big thing is we successfully integrated the Betazoid Houses, and I kind of missed when that was happening because I was talking about other stuff. But here, we have the Betazoid systems annexed into the Federation. We got 2 systems from that. I think we have pretty friendly relations with the Hyperions. And we've made first contact with a few other civilizations and have so far avoided war with any of the other major powers. And we've done a little bit of progress on the opening couple phases of the Borg storyline. Basically, we encountered the first Borg ship and discovered the warp highways.
Testing protocols.
So, in the next installment of this particular playthrough, I am going to be, I think, doing more stuff with the Borg, and also we're going to see a few of the missions in the mission tree get completed, including the construction of the Enterprise D and the few missions that I do with the Enterprise D. So that is going to be a Patreon exclusive, so if you want to see that and listen to me talk about this game a little bit more, become a patron, and you will be able to see that. There will be a link to the post in the Patreon page in the description of this video. And of course, as I said before, if you do join, if you do become a contributor on Patreon, thank you, of course. And be sure to fill out the entry survey and tell me that you joined because of this, so that I know that, maybe this is something that I should make an effort to make more content like this. I'm also going to be publishing another video about the Klingon campaign, the first hour or so of the Klingon campaign, and that one will be just on YouTube for free for everybody, and be talking about some strategy and weird balance issues with the Klingon campaign, and showing you a little bit more of what a militaristic campaign looks like in this game, because I do have a lot to say about the Klingon campaign, because some really weird stuff happens in that one. Stuff that I honestly can't even explain. Like, I was thinking of making a strategy guide for the Klingon campaign, but I honestly can't figure out what the heck is going on in that campaign, and did not feel comfortable writing a strategy guide without, understanding the mechanics of what was going on underneath the hood. So I will have a Klingon video, and then there will probably be a few follow-ups to that Klingon video, which will also be Patreon exclusives. And if these prove popular at all, I might do the same thing for the Romulan and Cardassian campaigns. I don't know if I'm going to play through any of these all the way to completion, and I probably won't narrate these campaigns all the way through to completion, so there might not be commentary for them, even if I upload the raw footage onto YouTube and make it available to patrons. There might not be commentary with those, but we'll see, because I'm honestly, I haven't finished any of the campaigns yet. I don't even know how long they are. I don't know how long it's going to take to play. So if you like this, join me again for the Klingon campaign, and if you want to see more of the Federation playthrough, then become a patron and check it out. You'll get all the other perks of being a patron, and you'll also be supporting the channel and the other channel where I do video essays, and also my personal blog. So thank you very much for your support, and perhaps I will talk to you again soon. Qapla'.
Construction in progress. Construction finished on schedule. We have surveyed a new star system.